Yes, Kathy
Yes.
Corliss should be joining as well. She also just received the link.
Okay. Lynn, we missed you.
Hi. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm
Usually you
back.
have all this pretty well organized.
Yeah, no, it should be well organized, but sometimes we forget the consultants need to be added in.
Okay, so we got Kathy.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and start off. I'm Jim Farrell. I'm the chair of this little working group, and I'm from the community at large. Charlie?
Here? Oh,
And
more than here?
who are you representing, Charlie?
We've been down this road before, Jim.
Many times, but somebody just turning on probably hasn't.
I'm on the planning commission, and that's the component that I'm representing, as well as the people of West Linn.
Darren Gustav.
I'm Darren Gusdorf. I work for Icon Construction and Development and part of the development group in West Linn.
John Floyd.
Yes, I am John Floyd. I work for the West Linn Planning Department.
Benjamin Gardner.
My name is Ben Gardner. I also work for the West Linn Planning Department.
Greg.
Yeah, Greg DiLoretto representing the Transportation Advisory Board.
Kate.
Hi, everyone. Kate Rogers. I'm a senior planner with MIG APG.
Greg.
I think you already got me.
Did I want to get you?
Yeah.
Okay, Scott.
Hi, Scott Irwin, Planning Commissioner, as well as Vice Chair of the Historic Review Board.
Shannon with an O.
Hi, I'm Shannon Eilis, and I'm representing the West Linn EDC.
Kim.
Kim Bria, I'm representing the West Linn Sustainability Advisory Board.
Tom. Can't hear you, Tom. Still can't hear you. Nope, don't hear you.
Yeah, Tom, you might need to switch your microphone on the computer in the app.
Vicky.
Vicki Olson, Committee for Citizen Involvement.
Shannon with an E.
Shannon Knight, I'm representing both CPI and EDC.
Darren Wise.
Darren Wise, Planning Manager and liaison to this group. Thank you.
Did I missed anybody? Kathy. Looks like I.
For joining late. Kathy Corliss, I'm consultant with MIG APG and working on the project team.
Yeah, I think I got everybody that's on here.
Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
Thank you. Tom Watton, Historical Review Board.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
And Jim, it looks like JJ's on now too.
JJ, you're up.
Yeah, hello, JJ Portlock with the development community.
Okay, we're going to have Darren Weiss is going to go over the role of the working group quickly in the meeting.
All right, thanks. Yep. So once again, the group was assigned 3 tasks. You've gotten through the first 2, House Bill 2001, Chapter 96. This is your final task to complete this clear and objective code compliance audit project and make a recommendation. The second part of this is just remind everyone the meeting guidelines that were agreed to back in February were attached to your meeting packet. So we will abide by those once again. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have you seen the in the packet you got? You have a summary of the notes. Anybody have any additions to those that you want to make or any corrections or anything? I don't see anybody's hand up. So we're going to move along, and then we're going to go ahead and discuss the recap of the August meeting, and then on to the clear and objective code. So go ahead, Darren. You got it for the August meeting recap.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so again, the last meeting was on the Clear and Objective Standards project, and it was really focused on getting the group familiarized with what this project was, including the concept of clear and objective standards, state statutes, legal cases that were presented by the city attorney's office, and then the types of solutions that the consultant team will utilize. And the consultant team went through those and gave some examples. Just to remind everyone, those types of solutions were true and false statements, counts or measurements, rate or ratios or calculations, and then lists and lists and menus. And again, those are some of the solution types that the consultant team has been using to try to get through our code to make it clear and objective. So I would recommend keeping those 4 things in mind as this discussion moves forward through this meeting, tying them back to those 4 different types of solutions. The other important thing was the consultant team talked about a 2-track system being an option for the code. So we'll try to make a clear and objective track for housing. But if the project couldn't meet that clear and objective tract, they could then switch to the 2nd tract, which is the discretionary tract, which is primarily in our code right now. So we're trying to get from the discretionary track and create a 2nd track of clear and objective standards. So you'll see this in chapter 55 as it's discussed today, that 2-track system in 55. So that's just a quick recap. Again, a lot of this will probably bear out in the conversation today, so I don't want to spend too much of your time recapping what happened last meeting and let you get into the meat of the meeting. So thank you, Chair, and I'll be quiet now.
Okay. Anyway, John and I discussed it over a little bit, and I think what we'd like to do, we have quite a bit to go over, and as most of you were kind of maybe struck like I was, it's quite a bit to really assimilate into our brain, and so we may not, so maybe to start off, just kind of figure or think about what you feel are the most important parts, and then John, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair Farrell. So I'd like to give a quick presentation, and then I'll move into the question session you and I talked about, if that's okay. So, Chair, okay. So yeah, I'm going to put a PowerPoint up since I can't really see the group very well. Just feel free to pipe up with any questions or comments, or if you can't hear me or something. So give me 1 second here. Okay, hopefully, let's see here. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my PowerPoint there. Again, for the record, John Floyd, Associate Planner with the West Linn Planning Department, and this is meeting 8 of the working group. So yeah, just as a quick overview of our meeting this afternoon, I just want to go over the general structure first. Darren gave a bit of a recap. I'll just add a couple of comments on top of that. Then I'd like to give a sort of high-level overview of the changes in package 1, which you're seeing today. Package 2 will be coming before you next month, and will include responses to some of your questions and comments today, as well as other chapters we'll be bringing forward. And then I'll sort of dive into some quick responses to the comments we received ahead of the meeting. We'll move into questions and discussion, and then we'll wrap up with a preview of the next meeting, and then sort of check in to see where we're at, to see if we can, if the group is comfortable making a recommendation at the next meeting as well. So I think Darren covered a little bit about the project necessity and goals as we discussed at the last meeting. I don't want to belabor too many points. It's a legal requirement we just have to comply with, and the real risk here is that the city risks losing authority to regulate development in the city. So if we don't comply with standards, we could risk our ability to enforce those standards. And as we discussed last meeting, there are appeals and legal actions across the state related to this, and local governments are not faring so well. So, so I think my third point here, I kind of want to sort of talk about just a little bit. Our goal is a content neutral update of the CDC, where, to the degree we can. So I think if a standard is already clear and objective, we're not as part of this project looking to make major changes to that standard unless it's otherwise required by state statute. I think the goal here is to focus on getting the existing standards into a clear and objective format. If there are concerns about whether or not that standard is appropriate, that's maybe a different project on the long range planning docket. So I just kind of want to mention that as being part of staff's approach and the project team's approach to our recommendations today. Also too, just in terms of how we got here, so the project team largely consists of planning staff. MIG, APG are the consultants the city's hired to assist us with this in the city attorney's office. And basically, with through their help, we went through the code and identified standards applicable to residential development that were not clear and objective, and then move forward in developing solutions to those conflicts or non-compliance or non-compliant sections. So as Darren mentioned at the last meeting, we discussed the 4 possible formats used in terms of making discretionary standards into more clear and objective language. And we've used all of these in the code: true, false, counts and measurements, ratios and calculations, and list menu. Most of the changes are in Chapter 55 that are in front of you today, but there are examples of this elsewhere as well. So package 1 really focuses in on 3 sections, and I tried to emphasize that in my staff report by sort of summarizing the changes to each chapter. The first section are the definitions in Chapter 2. The second are the base and overlay zones, and that includes all the residential zones, all the commercial industrial zones, the Willamette Falls Drive Commercial Design District, which is more of an overlay on top of our general commercial zone, and then the Willamette Neighborhood Mixed Use Transitional Zone. And then the third and largest sort of body of changes are the design review chapter in Chapter 55. And so the complement to Chapter 55 is Chapter 85, which is land division. And these were just too large to combine as a single package, so that will come before you next week. So just from a high level, the changes to the definitions were not really substantial. They're mostly clarifications and minor amendments, just sort of identifying points of discretion or lack of clear definition and sort of making those insertions. Two sort of bodies of definitions I wanted to call out specifically, just so the group understands where we came from on this. So the first are a series of new tree definitions, which include diameter, breast height, tree, significant tree, and tree cluster. And so we are, these definitions were created to help us convert the existing rather discretionary review standards in Chapter 55 into more easily a more predictable and sort of easier to read standard regarding tree preservation. In terms of coming up with those definitions, we reached into the community tree ordinance, section 8.510 of the municipal code, and basically we peg the definition of significant tree to those trees protected under the tree ordinance. So really there'd be more of a seamless transition on that. And the definitions track with the discretionary language already in the code. It's just, we're just trying to make it easier for someone to go measure all the trees, identify their species, and then determine which are potentially protected and which are not. So that was largely our approach on that one. Also too, the definition for adequate public facilities is rather verbose and actually is 2 paragraphs long. And so The other problematic part about this definition is that it actually includes approval criteria, and it's oftentimes approval criteria can sneak into the definition where really it can be hidden and it's not easily identified or known about and may be inconsistently enforced. So our recommendation here is to pluck the chapter out of definitions and then transfer it directly into the applicable chapters, which would be design review, conditional use, and land divisions. And so I specifically, it's on page, it's been relocated to page 247. And so one thing I do want to mention as I go through these slides, I've attempted to put page numbers at the top of the slides because it's a pretty voluminous packet we gave you. And there are a lot of unaffected pages, but you kind of have to flip through those to get to the section you're looking for. So anyways, so definitions, fairly minor changes, but we can certainly talk about those if you like. So the second body of changes were, were to the base zones, the sort of residential district, R20, R10, R7, R5, et cetera. The general commercial, general industrial, things like that. If you look in the memo, you'll see a lot of common changes to each chapter, and so we really were just having to do that. One main change was that we actually clarified the exemption language to include a broader variety of housing units, just to make sure it's clear that cottage clusters, townhouses, manufactured homes, and ADUs are not subject to design review. And so we just wanted, and I'll talk about what will require design review in a few slides here. But basically, we just wanted to clarify, the housing types, which should be generally treated the same as single family homes in the review process. The other change, which is really limited to 3 chapters, is that there were some housing types that were listed as conditional uses, and if it's housing, we have to provide a clear and objective track to approve them. And so generally these included senior citizen handicapped housing facilities in the R4.5, R3, and R2.1 zones, and then single family attached and manufactured homes in the R2.1 zone. So since we can't keep them as conditional uses, our recommendation was to move them into the category known as uses permitted under prescribed conditions, because they have certain criteria they have to meet in order to be allowed in the zone. And so otherwise, the other exemptions in these chapters were pretty minor and non-consequential. And again, we can talk about those at the end if you like. So the third body of changes relates to the design review chapter, which is chapter 55 and then pages 220 through 289 of the packet we provided for the meeting. And I think I just kind of wanted to sort of frame our conversation today as just reminding the group what actually has to go through design review, and that most housing being constructed in West Linn does not actually have to go through this. And so right now it applies to multifamily cottage clusters, dwelling units within a mixed use structure, for example, second and third story, manufactured homes, manufactured home parks, and residential development in the mixed use zone. And so the proposal would actually narrow the list of housing to the 4 unstriped, uncrossed through types of housing on this list here. So really, the changes we're talking about today applies to a fairly narrow subset of housing here in the city. And the way we approach the changes is that essentially we were trying to focus in on changing standards applicable to housing. So what we did was create a 2-track system in order to review this, as mentioned by Darren and our consultant at the last meeting. And so and I included the new chapter titles above to help illustrate how we're doing this. We're basically creating 2 new subsections within the design review chapter, one for class 1 design review, one for class 2 design review. And the way it works is that the existing standards remain applicable to all non-residential development. So essentially things like churches and schools, commercial development, the approval standards are not changing for those, and those remain as the as an optional path, as a discretionary path for people who don't or can't comply with our new clear and objective tract for approval for housing. So and the way the packet is set up is that we essentially copied all of the current standards for class 1 and class 2 into the new section, and then use cross out and underlining to help the group understand what those changes look like. And so we can talk more about that if you like. So I think in terms of this, just there are a lot of small changes in there. I just kind of wanted to touch briefly on 3 points. Again, tree preservation comes up a lot during review, and so through a combination of new definitions in our in the definitions chapter and language changes, the existing tree protection standards have been converted into clear and objective language. And so currently the city arborist decides which trees are significant based upon some generalized criteria. The effect would be to create a list of sort of species and minimum sizes in order to govern those. The second point is that our existing architectural standards are very discretionary. They leave a lot of judgment and sort of to the reviewer, to the applicant. So you're going to see a lot of new standards in there regarding things like building orientation, entries, windows, facade articulation, height transitions between uses, things like that. And we tried to be conservative in those and pull from other regional standards and examples in order to come to that. The emphasis here would be on finding standards that apply equally to both single family homes as well as multifamily development, and emphasis on human scale, which is in relationship to each other, to different building types, which is sort of the current goal of the code. And then finally, in terms of public facility standards, in order to address this, we actually tried to point the chapter towards other existing standards and criteria. So the chapter now points to the public works design standards, the transportation system plan, and the traffic impact analysis standards elsewhere in the code in order to try and simplify and create more consistency between city requirements. So prior to the meeting, we received comments from a couple of individuals, Scott Irwin and Shannon Knight. I had time to respond to Scott's, not so much Shannon's, but I think Scott had some thoughtful comments that I just wanted to touch upon. One is that he had some thoughts about the definitions of garage, which Shannon Knight also had, and then the definition of local street regarding how those definitions may be interpreted. And based upon those comments, we're going to present revised definitions at the next meeting. But I think those are pretty thoughtful comments there. I think there's a question about why the definition of yard references buildings, structures over 30 inches in height. That's kind of outside the scope of the project. It's a clear and objective standard right now, but it's tied to the building code. And so I just wanted to mention that it's a little bit outside the scope of the project, but it's a good question. And then his third comment was related to the adequacy of our standard regarding minimum community space per occupant of senior citizen and handicapped housing facilities. So that standard is actually an existing standard in the code. It's just been relocated out of the conditional use chapter and into the uses permitted subject to certain criteria. And so again, that's an existing standard that is clear and objective. And while it may be adequate it's somewhat outside the scope of this project. And so hopefully that helps clarify things on that. And again, I can go further into detail if you wish. So I think with that brief sort of high level introduction, I kind of wanted to move this into the discussion phase. And as Jim alluded, I kind of, the thought as Jim and I spoke this morning was to approach this in a way to help us preserve time for all topical areas. So I think what we'd first like to do is spend 5 minutes identifying questions related to the definitions chapter and the base zone chapters, because we really think that the meat of this is in chapter 55. And so if we could maybe just get some feedback from the group about if there are questions about definitions and base zones and what those questions relate to, we can make sure to reserve time after at the end after we talk about the design review chapter. I also think one of our members has to leave early, so maybe if he has questions he wants to pipe up as well, we'll give him a chance. But so that being said, I also just wanted to mention a couple other things as we have our conversation. If you know the page number on our 320-page document, please reference that. We can help you find that, but it just helps the group track on this. And then also we just ask, because of our limited time here, this is not planning commission where we can go all night. If we can maybe prioritize questions and topics which really benefit from group deliberation, minor grammatical errors and spelling, we can you can just call us and we can address that. So so with that, Jim, I'd like to maybe turn that back over to you then. So
yeah, what I'd like to do too is remind people that this is quite a bit to go over, and if we don't get through it all this afternoon, we do have the option of having another meeting, and this is something we can look at the end of this and see where we're sitting on our questions and whatnot. If we really want to go through another meeting with this on 55, or how we want to proceed with that toward the end. So JJ, you're going to be leaving early. So do you have any questions and whatnot that you'd like to ask?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Who would like to ask the first question or concern? This can't be that easy. Charlie.
I was just curious, a tree cluster, is 3 trees, is that a definition from some tree study, or could 2 trees be a cluster?
So I believe that comes from the existing standards. Let me dive into that, and I can come back to you in a second.
Okay, so that wasn't a change. It's consistent with what it was. Okay.
Did everybody really get a good chance to go over all this and kind of take it all in? Or do you feel a little overwhelmed? Vicky?
Oh, hi. I have a question on page 23. So it's the computer telling me it's page 23. Page 7 of the document. There's a bunch of crossed out dialogue in red and then crossed out. Was that relocated, or was that irrelevant information? I don't know why.
So that relates to the definition for bank full stage,
Yes.
which is essentially the code treats bank full stage and ordinary high water mark as the same. So we thought rather than have 2 terms for the same measurement tool, we would just consolidate using ordinary high water mark.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was looking at definitions on page 21. Let's see here. Nope, yeah. All right, I might have to.
What was the definition regarding?
Let me find the right sheet. I'm gonna go back to mute until I find where I need to be.
Should we move to Shannon next?
Well, let's go ahead and go. I think Kim had her hand up next. Then.
Okay.
So Kim, go ahead.
Kind of a clarifying comment and a question for John Floyd. On the Sustainability Advisory Board, we were tasked by council to review the CDC codes and make recommendations. And of all the things we reviewed, the tree codes was the only item that was relevant to the CDC. So that is, if you can confirm, John, if that's on the planning docket. So even though we're talking about tree codes, my understanding of what you just said is that this language is simplifying what already exists.
Correct.
And we do have tree code update on the planning docket, and that's
Correct.
subject to council prioritizing it, correct?
That's all correct. And so the conversion here would take discretionary language and convert the standards to clear and objective metric language that are easier to identify and measure.
Okay, thank you.
Shannon Knight.
Yeah, and I will just mention something because I know that that tree code is going to get worked on, but I guess I'll mention it when it gets worked on. Is one of the things that came up in the school district application was that this school district tried to tell us that all the trees they could take down because it was a tree farm, and it was a tree farm 40 years ago. So if it could say an active tree farm when you or a working tree farm when you go and change that tree code, that would make that clear for people that you can't say it's a tree farm when it was 40 years ago and now those trees are 100 feet tall.
Okay.
And then my only other comment, if you saw my email, was about the ground floor, because that was an issue with that Con Am project, where they tried to say the ground floor was the floor, that you entered on, that you could enter on either level, and so that would be considered the ground floor. There's no definition of the ground floor. So if you think about like market of choice for everyone else, if you think about market of choice area, and you have the downside, like on Hood Street, that are all the businesses on that street, you think that's the ground floor? Or if you go up like where 503 and FedEx is and Starbucks, is that the ground floor? So you could call either of those the ground floor because you're entering them from the ground, and there's no definition of what the ground floor is.
Okay, so I think to your first point, I believe that's a comment for a future docket item, correct? The trees, that wasn't for this project, that was for the next one. Okay, perfect, great. And then regarding this definition, I think your point's taken. I think the idea here was how to define an elevation, building elevation as you look at it. But we will take a look at that language to see if it can be tightened up. And I see your point on that. So, but I'm not sure there's the conflict you were mentioning, but I didn't have time to look into it. So we can report back later at the next meeting on that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Tom, are you ready?
Yeah, I think so. So I'm on page 37, and I'm under lot line. All right, you know what? I think I was reading this as the rear lot line, not the front lot line. So I apologize for taking your time.
Okay.
Shannon,
no problem.
Question? Scott, you had your hand up for a moment. I was going to mention one thing that I think might be easier, and I know the staff is going to hate me for this, and really hate me for this, but I know that Charlie and I have always kind of liked to have paper where you can flip back and forth to find what you want and make it easier instead of having to scroll through the computer all the time. And I'm certain Charlie's got his too. And even though I know the staff doesn't, has a lot of staff time to do that, it would make it a lot easier in the future when we could just continually just kind of go through this real quickly and find out what we want to talk about.
Okay. Well, if anyone wants paper in the future, we can certainly provide that. So if it helps people. So
I just, you can, however you want to handle it. Who is 5023 or see, 503, the phone number. Do you have any questions?
This is actually Chris Damgan from the City Attorney's Office at Jordan Ramus. I had to log in both by computer and by phone because my computer's not cooperating. No questions at this time.
Okay.
Okay. So in the interest of time, are there any more questions regarding definitions? So at this time? Okay. So I think that we can maybe put those aside for now, and we'll return with some responses in our next packet. What about the base zones? Any questions about some of those changes? Okay, well, we can reserve 5 minutes at the end if something pops into your head. So why don't we just move on to chapter 55 then, design review. If there are questions for the group, we can answer them, or we can go through the sections, or what would be most helpful to the group, since given the volumes of this.
Greg,
Yeah. No, I don't. And I think the reason, at least from me, the reason you're not hearing anything is it's clear and concise. We're not going through the whole code. We're just going through these things that make it clear and concise. So it's not like I'm not seeing a lot of policy here. What I'm seeing is, did we meet the state statute regarding clear and concise language? And so as far as I can tell, you did that, which means if you did that, I don't really have any questions, because you either took the existing code and you used the numbers you had in it to make it clear and concise. So there's no change there from policy. And then the ones you didn't, you made it line up with statutes. So I may be missing something, but I read the whole thing. At least I read the red parts, and I like the commentary. I've never seen that before in this kind of work. So you gave us a commentary on what the changes were and why the change occurred. And so I guess from my perspective, I didn't see a whole lot of questions because it's pretty clear and concise, like it was supposed to be.
Well, good. Well, thank our consultants help, or our consultant help for that with Kathy and Kate. So perfect.
So I think we're just lacking in giving you guys compliments. So,
Well, this is going to be easier than we thought.
Yeah.
Kim?
That was an applause reaction.
Okay. Well, actually, we might get through this fairly quick then.
Yeah.
Anybody else has any questions at all? So I guess we're probably not going to need another meeting. Whoops, we're back to Greg.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did have one question. We moved the public works standards referral in here to the public works standards, right? And I assume that those then are clear and concise. Just moving them doesn't mean you don't have to comply with the law, right?
Yeah, so there's, I mean, in many cases they are, in some cases they aren't. But we're trying to improve the existing situation here. So, and we're having ongoing conversations with the city engineer about this issue and about getting those standards addressed. So, but yes, and so we can pull out some specific examples if that would be helpful. So, yeah.
Kate, do you want to answer that then, Tom?
Yeah, thanks. And I would just say that overall, sort of in general, the public work standards are more clear and objective than the development code is. So they're much closer. There are some places where there is some discretionary language included. And so that's something that I think is on staff's radar. It's just not really part of the scope of this project, this, development code update project to address those. But yeah, we're certainly aware of that issue.
Okay, Tom, and then Shannon with an E.
Yeah, so I'm looking at page 220, 223, and that's under design reviews. And on 223, number 10, it says, this starts out with new development of a single family detached dwelling, not a single family development. So to me, I read that as a new development of a single family detached dwelling. That's a house. So is that reviewable or not reviewable? Like just a single family residence on a city lot, and maybe I'm in the wrong code area for that.
So I think so this section is our classes of design review. It's basically it's use is subject to a class 1 design review, and so the development in the mixed use district requires design review.
Okay, and I knew that it was probably might be a dumb question just based on where it was at, but
yeah,
thank you. It just caught my eye. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, Shannon with the E.
I just thought of something, and this is kind of going back to definitions, but in regards to Scott's comments about the local street, I just remember actually going through the TSP. And I think a local street, it doesn't have to necessarily mean a cul-de-sac. It just means it was designed to handle local traffic instead of, you know, being a thoroughfare or a highway or a big arterial or minor arterial. Like I know there's the minor arterial, you know, I think that's what the local street is. So I just maybe would get clarification on that because I don't think it necessarily means a cul-de-sac.
Yeah, so I'm looking at let me put Scott's comments up on the screen really fast. So let's see.
Okay, now look, it was late. And I'm sick with COVID, so my head was a little loopy. Okay.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, you had that caveat at your 11:30 p.m. Email. So so I think in terms of this, we did look at the TSP, and the TSP just has a little bit better definition for this, and so I think we were going to see about tweaking the language here based on that. So because it doesn't have to be a cul-de-sac, but I think it could. Let's see here. So
I mean, does it need a separate definition for a cul-de-sac, or?
Well, it's the connecting piece is the usage of the term through street, because at the Planning Commission we just created new rules for Chapter 96 regarding fee in lieu for avoiding doing like sidewalk construction if you do some work on your house. And so we created a new term for what is considered a through street. And so now that has its own definition, we have to be careful how that is being used in relation to all the other street definitions.
Yeah, so
it would be cool to see all the street definitions clustered together just to make sure they're all driving.
So I think since that project is not yet, it's on its way towards adoption, but not quite yet there. I think we are going to sort of make that adjustment a little bit later, but we're Chris is 2 desks over from me, so we're gonna get together and talk about this. So,
this is Darren.
Yeah.
If I may add my 2 cents here real quick. So I think the suggested language, John, you've got on the screen there, is a good solution.
Yeah, this is Scott's suggested language. So yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, if it aligns with our TSP definition, I think that's a good suggestion. And then Shannon, to your comment, there is a definition of cul-de-sac. It's on page 25 of the packet, so it's already defined in the community development code.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Anybody else? Well, I think Greg's statement earlier kind of says it. It's just basically going through it and checking to make sure it was clear and objective. And so far, besides little hiccups here and there, it looks like it is. Is that what everybody is kind of getting? Everybody Everybody got a thumb up on that?
I feel like I should have a comment, so I have a comment, but
Go for it, Shannon, with a no.
it's pretty clear. So I don't have any questions.
Okay, well,
Excellent. Okay. Well, if something does pop up, but between now and the next meeting, please feel free to email us and just let us know, just Darren or myself, and we can have a conversation. We can look into it and come back at the next meeting. So I just wanted to, we're always open for that. So
if anybody does have, an email to the staff, can be put off onto the rest of us too, so we can all look at it. But I'm coming from the development community. Do you guys see anything at all in there that's a red lot, draws something to your attention?
Hi, Darren from Icon. I'm going to be brutally honest and say that I skimmed through this and looked at the red lines. I'm going to take another look at 55. I think that's where most of the meat is, but I unless there's something that you guys want to point our attention to that is a change, the language and the rewrites and being clear and objective, that all makes sense to me. But if there's something that's different, it'd be great if you kind of pointed us to those specific items.
I would focus your attention on 55.105.
Okay.
Those are the class 2 design standards. And because in here is, if you have a chance to have a little more time to spend with it, there was some conversions done, so that you may want to take a look at. I don't know if our consultant wants to address it in more detail, but I would focus your attention there. And so, housing is being constructed under current standards, but those will remain available. But the new clear and objective standards are the most differences are in 55.105. And I think Kathy has her hand up.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what John said, right, which in converting what were very discretionary, descriptive architectural standards, we had to, simplify those to create clear and objective standards that would be measurable. And so not everything is a completely kind of one-to-one translation, but in trying to create new clear and objective standards that capture the spirit of what the architectural standards did. That was our goal, right? So you won't see, okay, we translated this standard exactly to this standard because it wasn't always possible. And I think we talked about that last time. I don't know if you all recollect, but we had some examples of that. And so you'll see that in action. I don't know, Kate, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so the existing design review standards talk about human scale and compatibility, transition between different scales and uses. And so I think our attempt to make those clear and objective, or to kind of translate that in a clear and objective manner, was things like minimum window coverage standards, and entry, building entry orientation and visibility standards. And that kind of gets at sort of human scale detailing of facades and things like that. We also added some articulation and sort of detailed design element standards, and really drawing from existing codes that we've worked on or that we've looked at as kind of good examples and best practices. And kind of, I would say a relatively limited set of standards that are not kind of trying to go too crazy. Because these will mostly apply to multifamily developments. So just what are kind of the key things that get at those, community concerns around sort of quality design and detail and breaking up, large blank facades and things like that. So I think that's where there were some kind of choices made, where it's not, there's sort of a lot of different ways you could potentially write, human scale or compatibility standards or, detailing standards. But if you want to focus your attention on that section, I think it would be helpful. It's always helpful to hear from the development community to see how well you think those would work and whether any red flags are raised for you.
Yep. Darren, if you have to think about it, in the next week, I'll be back with you in a minute, Scott. Having to think about it, we would like to see anything that you have to say about it, that you feel is you know, detrimental or whatever, or to the development community, if you just kind of put it in writing so that we could see it before the next meeting, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Scott.
Thank you. So I'm guessing we're in 55 now. If we all look at page 232, and so down at the bottom there, 55.095, section A. The new language, unless waived by the planning director. So, well, my initial reaction is, you know, Darren is the planning manager, and I don't think we have a planning director. And so this language is giving authority to a person who does not exist in city staff.
Derek, you want to pick that one up?
Yeah, I could address that. Yeah. There used to be a planning director. That position was shifted to planning manager, but the community development director has given me the authority of the planning director under the code. So anywhere it says planning director, it's the planning manager authority. We just haven't gone back in and cleaned up the code to make those changes.
So shouldn't it say unless waived by city staff with the authority of the planning director?
Well, I think this is fine.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I would go with him, Darren. I mean, I think you really ought to do it this way.
I don't know. I mean, I went to law school. I'm just saying, it's very clear and objective that it says planning director and there is no planning director.
Hey, you have something to add to that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry.
Sorry. I think a lot of codes kind of spell it out what the various sort of decision-making authorities are. I can't recall specifically whether this code does that. And it looks like Chris Damgan has his hand up, so he might know the answer. But that should be spelled out somewhere in the code what the city staff's planning director's authority is.
Chris, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. You're right on it. I mean, there has been tested case law on this. Even if the title is not precise, and cities are prone to change titles, the authority and the discretion is always tracked back to a higher instance. And in Darren's case, as he was saying, he's been delegated that where it says it. It's ultimately at the discretion of the city manager, which if you look throughout the municipal code, you'll see city manager shall issue business licenses, well, or, whatever it might be. That's almost always delegated and understood and defensible. So I think you're okay. I don't think you have to sweat this detail.
Hey, Greg? Okay. Yeah, question answered. Yeah, it kind of looks like, does anybody else have anything else that you're thinking of? Because otherwise, I think we can probably get going, wrap most of this up. Scott?
That's fine. Okay. I didn't mean to make that something to get too hung up on, so I appreciate it. Though, so I like Darren a lot, and I think he does a really good job. But I do think it's kind of odd how this section, it starts off with like, hey, this has to be met. But, the planning director / manager, he can say, that's not so important. I mean, doesn't that add a level of subjectivity to the rules there?
Kathy, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've gone back and forth on this, and I'm going to probably let Chris jump in on this answer. Our understanding is as long as there is a clear and objective path, in other words, we've provided a list that if you met that as the applicant, it's acceptable. That is a clear and objective path. If you want to request a change from that, in other words, you want to request something to be waived, that's an option. But it is there is a clear and objective path available, which is to provide the information listed below or to meet those standards. And so, Chris, I don't know if you want to jump in on that and clarify that any further.
Kathy, I had another IT fiasco. Do you mind restating the question? Because I couldn't hear what the question was you had.
Yeah, so as I understand it, the question was about code section, and this is at page 232. At the very bottom of the page, it's the last line. It says, unless waived by the planning director, and that's the change, the provisions of the following section shall be met, and it lists the sections that have to be met. And the question was, does the phrase, unless waived by the planning director, create discretion? And I think my understanding is that as long as the list itself provides a clear and objective path, in other words, you could simply meet the list, you don't have to ask for a waiver, that represents a clear and objective path. But again, I think that's one we've gone back and forth on, so I thought maybe you might want to weigh in on it.
Yeah, legally that hasn't been challenged in this general context. I think for now, for these purposes, it's probably likely okay, because it refers to the discretion of the decision maker, not the discretion of a standard, which is usually the thing that gets communities in hot water in this environment. So there is still an element to allow and to ensure that people interpreting and regulate or charged with regulating this code, when there is discretion, it's based on decision, not on standard, and that's, I think, holds true.
What we did have to drop, if you look at the next page, subsection 3, the code used to allow the director to require additional information and responses.
Correct.
And that, of course, is discretionary because the applicant, doesn't know what those are. So, right.
Shannon with a night, or with an E, excuse me, Shannon Knight, then Charlie.
Yeah, sorry, my camera keeps going on and off, so I don't know if it's on or not. My concern with that was less the discretionary part, more that's a lot of power to give a single individual without, having anybody else review it. So I think that was maybe more the concern, and not necessarily it may not have to do with the discretionary language part, which is what we're working on. But that was my concern there.
Okay, Charlie.
If I can.
Yeah, Kathy, Charlie Matthews, is this allocation of this authority, is this new to this document, or is this just a transfer from the previous code?
If I can step in here briefly. So I think I can address the question in the two parts. One is that the group may want to look at municipal code section 1.118 about designation of powers and duties. And specifically subsection 2 says, where an ordinance code section or resolution specifies that a particular subordinate of the city manager shall have certain powers or duties, the city manager shall nevertheless have the authority to transfer or assign any of those powers and duties to any other subordinate. And it kind of goes on to talk about, let's see here. It's a very long section, sorry. It also, talks about changing titles and things like that. So I think our Muni code already covers this, but we can look into that. And then to the second part, is that these powers are already exist in the code for the planning director. And so, for example, in chapter 99.035, there's, as well as this section, I believe those powers already exist. So it's a restatement.
So we're not creating additional authority, we're just simply rewording it?
That's my understanding, yeah. So.
Is that yours too, Kathy?
That's yours, Darren. You're up.
Yeah, so you can see it right in the code itself. If you go down to C where it's crossed out, it says the planning director shall determine the applicability of the approval criteria. It's just been restated in a different manner up top.
Yeah, correct.
And so I'll add this too. So This is for class 1 design review, which a lot of class 1 design review revolves around additions or alterations of existing buildings. So in some cases, you might not be able to meet the window coverage components or the door orientation. So it would make sense to allow the option to not make them change the door orientation if they're just doing a simple change to the structure, which is a class 1 design review, and which is under the authority of the planning manager / director to approve. So it's just one of those things where it just provides some flexibility, so you don't actually have to do more of a change to a building than what is being proposed, if that makes sense.
Scott?
Yeah, and definitely, I don't think there should be any concern regarding abuse. I mean, because John and Ben are here just waiting for Darren to make a bad call, so he's got to do his job well.
Okay, is everybody happy with that? All right, can we move on then to the next? Anybody else have anything else they want to bring up before we slow this down? Okay, well, Lynn, is there any citizens that want to say anything?
No, we don't have any citizens.
Okay, so I kind of get in the general gist that we don't need to have another meeting on 55. Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay, Darren, can you cover what's going to go on for the next deal? And can we get if there's, how many pages is involved with the next group? And if there is as many as this, can we have it 2 weeks in advance?
Yeah, thanks. I'll let John and Kate and Kathy talk about the amount of work on the next packet that will come to you. But yes, we will get the materials out to you as we did this time. It wasn't exactly 2 weeks in advance, but it was 2 weekends in advance, so it gave you a couple of weekends. And we'll do our best to get out exactly 2 weeks in advance. But again, it's Kathy and Kate are putting a lot of time into this, so they deserve some breaks. And but I'll let John and Kathy and Kate talk about what's going to be in the next packet.
Chris has to say at the Attorney General's. Chris?
Of course. I'll just go ahead, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Jim and John. Yeah, no, just real quick, I just wanted to compliment your consultants. They've done a really significant job. This is not an easy lift, and I think they've done a really excellent job. We met briefly a couple weeks ago to stress test an item, and I think you're being very well served. That's all.
Okay.
John?
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, so we yes, the next packet will focus around the subdivision requirements, which will have a similar volume of changes as design review, and required improvements and other related things around that. So it's hard to say the exact page count at this point, only because it's still being massaged and fine tuned, and we haven't actually. I also just haven't quite looked at. I haven't done that page count, but it will be of similar size. So if people want paper copies, hole punched is included, so we can do that. So keep us posted. So.
Okay. Well, folks, I think we've done it, and I do thank the consultants. They obviously are doing a good job, and I appreciate that. I think we all do it because we get out of here with an hour and 10 minutes. Hey, Charlie, can the Planning Commission do that?
We like to take more time to, as you know, as former commissioner.
Just checking. All right, folks, I think we pretty much had it. Whoops. Darren, just saying goodbye, or?
No, I'm sorry. Real quick question. I don't know if it's appropriate under the whole body, but while I got everybody in the group, I won't be here for the next meeting, but I have a colleague, Harlan Burrow, who works in our office on land acquisition, and the subdivision context is something that I know we want to peek at with you guys. Is it appropriate to assign an alternate? Does that get voted on, or I'm not sure how to to ask if I can have a replacement.
Darren, I think we could probably just vote on it. Would that be okay with, I mean, do we have any rules and regulations that say we cannot do that as a group?
So let me have a discussion with some folks here. The council appointed the group, didn't assign an alternate to Darren's position, but I don't see any harm in Harlan sitting in and providing comment. And then if it does come down, I mean, hopefully again we can find consensus and we don't need to go to a vote. So you know, if as long as the group is finding consensus, if it went to a vote, I would say I'll check to see if Harlan could vote for in Darren's absence, but hopefully it doesn't come down to that. Hopefully it's a consensus and we can just move forward.
Let's take a real quick consensus so you have that. So does everybody agree that? So anybody disagree? Nobody's disagreeing.
All right, yeah. So Harlan can sit in Darren's absence and give Icon's position.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, does the consulting team have anything else they want to add, or John?
I have nothing.